Yanxi thought about it, and it was right. In addition, Yanxi went to the Leng family before, only her mother and daughter. Now Song Runking heard that his niece was getting married, so he asked for leave from Tianjin. Yanxi didn't want to deal with Song Runking, so he didn't go to the Leng family for 3 or 4 days. At this time, he thought that since the things were so good, he had to send a letter to Qingqiu to make her happy. Therefore, he didn't even eat dinner and went to Luo Huahutong. Now they were interacting openly, and the car was parked at the door of the Leng family. Yanxi went in and went to the upper room. Qingqiu was setting up a large embroidery frame, sitting under the electric light, embroidering a square of water-red satin. Yanxi came in. Qingqiu looked back and smiled, still lowered her head to embroider, but said, "Just keep silent and Russian." Yanxi came over and saw that the flowers on the frame were embroidered 2 out of 3 times and all covered with paper. Qingqiu was embroidering a big red peony. Yanxi said, "Red flowers embroidered on a red background. Won't they be very noticeable, right?" Qingqiu said, "It's a light red background, so bright red flowers are embroidered on it." Yanxi said, "Where's your aunt?" Qingqiu said, "She went to the kitchen." Yanxi laughed. "What time is it? Do you still have time to make trouble for this?" Qingqiu said, "When?" "During dinner." Yanxi laughed. "Really? Why are you embroidering this?" Qingqiu said, "Can't you tell it's the material of the clothes? Think about it. When have I ever worn a light red dress?" Yanxi said, "Oh, I see, this is a dress. Why do I have to embroider it myself? There are plenty of embroidered satins in the silk and satin shops." Qingqiu said, "I think the patterns are too coarse, so I embroidered it myself." "Let me ask you, do you advocate wearing a long gown or a skirt?" Yanxi looked at the pattern on the fabric was very long, and it was not something that could fit into a short dress. So she said, "Of course it is better to have a long one. First, the flower on the dress can be a whole from top to bottom. Second, the long dress with a gauze is a good match, and it looks like a fairy. Third, a skirt is low, so it is better to wear a long dress with a high hem, so that 2 jade legs can be shown. Fourth." Qingqiu put down the needle, gently pushed Yanxi and said, "Nonsense, nonsense, don't look down." Yanxi smiled and said, "Nonsense? This is exactly what I say from experience. I don't know if your opinion is the same as mine, but it is very similar to advocate wearing long clothes." Qingqiu smiled and said, "Did you come here today just to talk nonsense?" Yanxi said, "I have a lot of good news to tell you," because he gave a general idea of what he had prepared at home. Qingqiu said, "It's good. I am a child from a poor family. I don't know if I have the blessing to wear it." Yanxi smiled and said, "I won't tell you that kind of hypocritical words. In our love, there is no such thing as rich or poor." When Yanxi said this, Qingqiu just lowered her head to embroider. Yanxi saw a section of snow-white neckband under her hair, so he walked behind her, stretched out his right index finger, and gently raked her neck twice. Qingqiu smiled and shrank her neck, turned around, pointed the embroidery needle at Yanxi, and said, "You make trouble, I will poke you with the needle." Yanxi said, "Do you think you should poke me? I have also seen in books that the joy of the boudoir is better than drawing eyebrows." Qingqiu said, "This is my home, not yours. Let's talk about this when we get to your home." Yanxi smiled and said, "I thought you put powder on your neck, so I reached out and touched it, but you didn't put powder on." Qingqiu turned around and frowned and said, "Be serious. What's the point of people hearing it?" When Yanxi wanted to say more, he heard Mrs. Leng's voice in the yard, so he didn't mention it. As soon as Mrs. Leng entered the door, Yanxi stood up first and called her aunt. Mrs. Leng just nodded. Because he was already a son-in-law, she couldn't call him master or sir. But since they were not married, she couldn't just call him son-in-law. She couldn't call him by his nickname. She couldn't change it at the moment, so she didn't call him anything. So she asked, "Have you eaten at this time?" Yanxi said, "No, I came here because I want something," and asked Qingqiu if she wants it. Mrs. Leng said, "I don't need to be polite. Nothing in your family is bad. Do we want anything?" Yanxi said, "Qingqiu said that she already had a string of pearls and didn't want it anymore. Now the family bought another one, which is bigger than the previous one. I wonder if she wants it." Mrs. Leng said, "Whatever you do in your house, it's fine. These treasures won't go bad even if they are kept for 1,000 years. It doesn't matter if there is one more string." Yanxi said, "That's it. "Aunt, if you want to buy something, you can tell me. I have some money in private, and you can take it out at will." Mrs. Leng said, "I have nothing to do. We are a family, and I only have Qingqiu. I think you are like my own child. I have nothing to hide. You can save your money for the future. Why spend it on something unreal?" Yanxi smiled and said, "Aunt, what you said is right, but I mean to make her something more as a souvenir." Mrs. Leng smiled and said, "I agree with this. But you new people are all exchanging rings, which I think is too ordinary. It's better to exchange the ones you carry with you, so that you can see the true feelings. It doesn't matter whether they are valuable or not." Mrs. Leng only said this sentence, and Han Ma called outside and went out again. Yanxi walked over and said softly to Qingqiu, "What's the matter? It seems that my aunt doesn't trust me." Qingqiu stopped sewing and said seriously, "That's not the case. But I know what she is worried about. She always thinks that there is a huge gap between our two families, rich and poor. She is always a little worried that your family will look down on poor relatives." Yanxi said, "That's absolutely not a problem. Not to mention that such a phenomenon will not happen, even if it does, as long as the two of us are happy." Qingqiu said, "I said the same thing, but we both hope that the family can get along in harmony, and there won't be any estrangement." Yanxi said, "Don't worry, I will never let you get into any trouble. The lamp is here. If I have a start, if there is no end, the rich and the poor cannot be broken. In the future, if I meet water, I will die in the water. If I meet fire, I will die in the fire." Qingqiu dropped the needle and thread in her hand, stepped forward, stretched out her hand to cover Yanxi's mouth, and said, "Why do you make such a strong oath?" Yanxi said, "You always don't believe me. What can I do? Now I have no choice but to show you my heart." Qingqiu said, "Why should I believe you? Think about it. If I didn't believe you, how could I have gotten to this point? My mother is a third party after all. She knows what our union is like. It's natural for her to be worried." Yanxi said, "No wonder she said that exchanging rings is a very ordinary thing. It's a matter of life and death, but I have to exchange it with something I carry with me. This is easy, but you know my temper. I never carry diamonds or gems with me. What can I exchange?" Qingqiu said, "It doesn't have to be diamonds or gems. If you really want, you have something that can be exchanged." Yanxi said, "Where can I get it? Unless it's a fountain pen. Can this be used?" Qingqiu blushed and smiled. "Don't think about the appearance. Do you have anything under your clothes that is close to your skin?" Yanxi said, "Yes, I have a small jade plate tied on my belt. I have been wearing it since I was a child. I don't know what the previous generation meant by tying this on me. But when I understood, I had tied it to my body for many years and was reluctant to take it off, so I kept it until now. I forgot about it because I didn't pay attention to it. If you want it, I will give it to you." Qingqiu smiled and said, "Why do I need this thing from you? But my mother said so. I hope you can take one of this thing, just to celebrate the occasion." You should know that when she said this, she was very happy to get a son-in-law. Yanxi smiled and said, "This is a favor that my son-in-law is happy to do. After a month, it's in my hands, isn't it?" Qingqiu said, "You know what else to say." Yanxi then lifted his clothes and reached into his clothes to take out the jade pendant and handed it to Qingqiu. She took it and looked at it. It was an old silk ribbon tied to a jade pendant. There was a duck on the top, and under the duck was a piece of jade that was 6 or 7 centimeters wide and 1 inch and 1 centimeter long. It was less than 1 centimeter thick and was the color of spring water, with some slight red silk lines on it. The jade was tied to her skin, and it was still warm when she touched it in her hand. Because she was lost in thought while holding it, her face turned red. She shook her head and whispered, "Forget it." Yanxi said, "I was asked to take it off and give it to you, so why don't you want it?" Qingqiu paused for a moment before explaining the reason, and Yanxi laughed along with her.